Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anupama, Professor at Department of Economics, Punjabi University, Patiala. I am going to talk about the module Approach to the Analysis of Urban Policy Making and Plan Formulation from Population, Urbanization and Poverty. So students, we are going to discuss mainly about the integrated urban policy, its objectives, strategies, the processes, and the evaluation of the same. In the current phase of rapid urbanization all across the world, urban planning has erupted as a major policy issue, as it is being felt that all the urban advantages can only be realized if urban growth is managed properly. In the developing economies, wherever, due to lack of sufficient funds or political will, the urban growth is not properly managed or unplanned, most urban settlements are characterized by shortfalls in housing and water supply, inadequate sewerage network, traffic congestion, pollution, haphazard and unplanned urban growth, lack of employment opportunities, mushrooming unauthorized colonies, and land conversion from agriculture to non-agriculture is resulting in grave concerns for environment and also the health of the masses. Growing contamination, increase in resource constraints, non-conforming land use pattern, and an overall decrease in quality of life is visible in many urban areas. This calls forth the importance of proper management of the urban areas. Therefore, for better urban life, a good planning and proper implementation of the plans is the crying need of time. A good planning provides a vibrant, attractive, and secure environment for people to live, work, and place, and encompasses good governance, a competitive economy, and high quality of living and environmental sustainability. Without proper planning and management, city become congested with insufficient facilities and so on, unlivable. Therefore, for a livable city and its sustainable development, a well-integrated policy is always needed. Hence, this module aims to throw light on an integrated urban policy, the urban policy objectives, appropriate policy environment, the urban policy process, the levels of plan formulation, the stakeholders of urban policy, the participation by stakeholders in urban governance, and evaluation of plan and future plan formulation. An integrated urban policy. An integrated urban policy is a coherent, cohesive urban plan which seeks for coordination and interrelations between various levels of governance, coordination between separate specialized departments of municipal authorities, and between various complementary and competitive objectives of an urban plan. Looking from the perspective of the target areas of urban plan, here we can state that an integrated policy focuses on three dimensions of an urban policy. These are economy, society, and environment. An integrated policy has to keep in mind these three principles. Now let us discuss about recognizing the interaction. The urban policy must recognize the interaction and contradictions among the three dimensions of urban policy. The focus is generally on enhancing complementarities and reducing trade-offs among these dimensions. We can note that although the three dimensions of integrated urban policy are portrayed as equal spheres with interlinkages, but any of these spheres can assume greater importance in different contexts. For example, functioning of both the economy and society ultimately depends upon the environment. For integrated policy, this principle has the following objectives. Number one, to ensure that the policy decisions are acceptable with regard to each of the three dimensions. Secondly, to identify innovative policies that will draw on synergies among the three dimensions. Thirdly, to identify any trade-offs and propose remedial measures. And fourthly, to increase the transparency and accountability of different stakeholders' attitudes towards each of the three dimensions. Continuity. The urban planning is a continuous policy cycle, especially at early stages. It should be noted that policy making is not typically a linear process. Different policy participants may also enter into a policy process at its different stages, deploying different building blocks of analytical and process-related tools. Policymaking, whether segmented or integrated, can be disaggregated into stages and substages, which make up a policy cycle. With the understanding that policymaking in practice is not linear or even sequential and is typically made up of multiple policy cycles without a clear starting point. Here, we may begin with the consideration of a problem or issue that may arise from a previous policy or the lack of a policy, and that requires government attention, that is, agenda setting. It then moves to the consideration of options to address the problem, that is, the stage of policy formulation. In the third stage, decision makers prescribe a particular course of action, that is, decision making. In the fourth stage, the prescribed course of action is translated into action. So this stage would be called the stage of policy implementation. The results of the policy are then monitored and evaluated against its original aims, and adjustments to the policy, if needed, are made accordingly. That is, the policies are evaluated, and which will be including monitoring as well. An integration filter is applied at every stage of the continuous policy cycle. Policymaking in practice is not linear or even sequential and is typically made up of multiple policy cycles without a clear starting point. In many countries, policymaking may also be fragmented with lags in between stages. Moreover, each stage has feedback loops with other stages, reflecting the dynamics of policymaking, but such feedback loops are typically ignored in policymaking. All these elements need to be taken into account when applying an integrated urban policy, which should be considered as a problem-solving process with a lot of iterative refinement to manage public problems. In integrated urban policy, an integration filter is applied at every stage of the continuous policy cycle. This broadens the venue for shaping policies in an integrated fashion. This approach, in particular, addresses the gaps between sustainability-oriented decision-making and implementation, as critical deficiencies in implementing capacity are identified at the outset. In addition, by focusing on the entire continuous policy cycle, integrated urban policy addresses the policy breach between decision-making and evaluation. Finally, through its emphasis on participatory policymaking and interministerial coordination, integrated urban policy not only connects the various stages of policy process within a particular sector, but also brings together policy processes across sectors, thereby making integration a shared objective among sectoral policymakers. Figure 3 illustrates the overlay of the three dimensions onto a policy cycle. Superimposing the three-dimension considerations over the making of a particular policy, however, faces a number of challenges. The first challenge is that of the problems in agenda setting. In agenda setting, the major problem is to take up the relevant issues in policy agenda of the three dimensions in such a way that the long-term and short-term goals do not contradict each other. The vested interest may not be influencing the agenda, and each of the issues is not misinterpreted in any way. Second challenge is that of policy formulation. Applying the three dimensions together to the policy formulation requires additional cost and cross-sectoral analytical capacity. Moreover, expanding the scope of potential solutions requires the participation of a large number of stakeholders, which can be costly and time-consuming. But if there are serious budget constraints, the number of options that can be availed for an integrated policy framework can be limited. The third challenge is the challenge in decision-making. Data or information gaps, weak analytical capacity, and uncertainty tend to weaken the basis for sound decision-making, which may lead to unacceptable, non-satisfactory decisions for stakeholders. The fourth challenge is regarding implementation. Implementation of any policy may be hindered due to lack of coordination between various departments or insufficient funds. Implementation may proceed initially within the capacity and budget of the implementing agency, but it may soon wear out the capacity and depletes the budget without replenishment. Sudden unexpected changes in the cost or increase in cost component may also lead to failure of implementation of the policy. The fifth challenge is that of evaluation. Evaluation of the adopted policy is very necessary so that suitable changes can be made for the next policy cycle for an effective urban plan. But many of the policies may take a long period to show their impact upon the economy, society, or the environment. And therefore, evaluation process may be faulty if it goes on assuming that the current policy is not at all effective. Moreover, effects of a particular policy are often interwoven with other policies and events, making it difficult to isolate the impacts. Besides, there may be resistance to substantive evaluation as the results could be unfavorable to those who design, decide, and implement the policy. Now we can discuss about appropriate policy environment. The third level of integration is to address policy constraints in terms of political support, administrative capacity, and analytical capacity within the policy process. Political support. The political support is critical as integrated policies may represent major changes from the status quo, altering the existing balance of power and interests. Therefore, proactive political management with carefully crafted strategies is essential to generate and sustain the political support needed for such policies. Administrative capacity. Administrative capacity refers to a government's capacity to formulate and carry out policies. Although this capacity is mostly associated with the implementation stage of a policy cycle, it is also relevant to the other stages such as the capacity to organize stakeholder consultations during the agenda setting. Thirdly, the analytical capacity. The analytical capacity is critical for integrated policy because multidimensional integrated policies tend to face more complexities and uncertainties than single-dimensional policies. Lack of such capacity may create a bias towards policies in which the effects can be analyzed with greater certainty. These three components form a stylized strategic triangle in a policy environment. Each of them is playing an indispensable role in determining the extent of success or failure of urban integrated policy. Now, we can talk about integrating the policy objectives, policy environment, and the policy processes. The three capacities are helpful in identifying the constraints, the need for capacity building, and the appropriate strategies to overcome the constraints and optimize the achievements. The analytical capacity determines the potential usefulness of integrated policy in improving the quality of policy decisions. Political support and administrative capacity constrain the types of policies that can be realistically made. It is important to identify areas where capacity building is needed. Unlike traditional policy analysis, in which capacity constraints are regarded as given, an integrated urban policy, through considering the policy environment, can include capacity building activities as part of the policy making. Further, the determination of appropriate strategies required to complement a particular policy in order to overcome deficiencies in the policy environment are urgently needed. The consideration of timing and sequencing of policy actions, for example, can also be incorporated as part of such strategies. An integrated policy, thus, would be an integrated framework of the three dimensions of the urban policy, or say the objectives, each of which follow a policy cycle whose success or failure depends upon the three capacities, which are political support, analytical capacity, and administrative capacity. This integration can be observed from figure 5. Now we can discuss about plan formulation, its levels, and stakeholders. The analysis so far has clearly indicated that at each stage of the policy cycle, that is, while setting the agenda, formulation of the plan, decision making, and implementing or evaluating the plan, governance is the major issue. No governance other than the participatory governance can be good governance. The participatory governance takes care of the interest of each of the stakeholders who are equally involved in the process of formulation of the plans. For the urban plans to be inclusive, these should be multi-level, multi-stakeholders, and multi-sectoral. They represent the different facets of government, economy, and society that work together during the policy phase. Figure 6 illustrates the interconnectedness among social, economic, and environmental sectors. Different levels, such as at the regional, city, and community levels, and public, private, and civil society stakeholders for following the predetermined goals of the economy, society, and the urban environment. The first element of formulating an integrated plan is to identify the different actors across levels of governance. These are regional, cities, or at the communities level. The multi-level approach helps to define the critical players and to create a skeleton for participation throughout the process. The result is an inclusive process that considers the interrelation and connection between actors. The second element uses a multi-sectoral approach to assess existing policies, regulations, financial flows, etc., to determine how to best integrate economy, society, climate change, and sustainable development policy and planning. The third element focuses on the identification of multi-stakeholder groups, public sector, private sector, and civil society, who should be consulted and actively engaged in the planning process. Public participation has become a central element of planning activity over the last decades. The planning literature has given considerable attention to participation in theory and practice, discussing its benefits for democratic governance, its multiple goals and criteria for assessing success. In this respect, the planner's role is very important. The planner's role can be observed under three categories. The first one is the technical role. The technical role is more in isolation from others, primarily collecting and analyzing information and proving objective advice. The second role is political one. The political or bureaucratic role is the arena or activity which planner encourage participation strategically only from particular groups. The third role is collaborative role. Under the collaborative role, the planner focuses on bringing together stakeholders representing face-to-face dialogues to collectively address shared problems. In most of the urban projects, several studies have shown that the success or failure of an urban plan depends upon the participation levels of the stakeholders. Of course, higher the participation, higher will be the probability of realizing the desirable outcomes. Therefore, interactive governance is considered to be a better option. The interactive governance is described as a way of conducting policies with involvement of citizens, social organizations, and enterprises in early stage of policy making. Here, the success of community participation in formulation and implementation of an urban plan depends upon the breadth and depth of the participation. The breadth of participation measures the degree to which each member of the community is offered to participate in the plan formulation process. For example, the invitation policy of municipalities as how often they send the invitation, information, and accessibility to different sectors. On the other hand, the depth of participation determines the degree of influence of people's opinion in shaping and implementing a plan. The stages of stakeholders' participation. The participation of the stakeholders can be categorized in following stages. The first one is information stage, informing the stakeholders in the first and most important stage of plan formulation with adequate participation of the stakeholders. To a large degree, politicians and administration determine the agenda for decision making and inform those involved. But for active participation of the stakeholders, they should be informed at the first place about the broader objective and the strategies to be undertaken with given resources and constraints. If the planning body or administration does not use the opportunity to invite interested actors to have input on plan formulation, it would be termed as no impact participation. The second stage is the consultation stage. Under participatory approach of plan formulation, consulting the stakeholders is very important. In most of the cases of urban planning process, generally the politicians and administration determine the agenda but regard those involved as a useful discussion partner in the development of policy. Politicians do not, however, commit to the results of this discussion. If the opinion of the stakeholders is not included in the plan formulation to any extent, this would be termed as an approach of no outcome participation. The third stage is that of advising the stakeholders. In principle, politicians and administration determine the agenda but give those involved the opportunity to raise problems and formulate solutions. These involved actors play a full-fledged role in the development of policy. Politicians are committed to the results in principle but may deviate if they are accounted from them in the final decision making. This approach has full involvement and participation role of the stakeholders in formulation of opinion. But implementation of outcome symbolizes it as more a if and buts participation or a moderate participation. The fourth stage is that of co-producing the solution approach. Together, politicians, administrations, and those involved determine a problem-solving agenda in which they search for solution together. Politicians are committed to these solutions with regard to the final decision making and having tested this outcome in terms of a priority conditions. The fifth stage is that of co-deciding. Politicians and administration leave the development and decision making of policy to those involved, and the civil service provides an advising role. Politicians simply accept the outcomes. The results of the process have an immediate binding force. This becomes the most effective modes of participation through a motivated team effort for smooth and joint decision making. Under such cases, the role of civil society organization is very important as they work from collecting information, mobilizing the opinion of the masses to the stage where it finally takes the shape of a formal plan. All of these stages are shown in the spherical forms in the figure 7, showing that a large sphere has a greater effectiveness and area of activity and participation by the stakeholders. We can easily see that the smallest sphere is that of the no impact participation, and the stage of co-deciding occupies the largest sphere. This stage is considered to be the ideal one. Evaluating the plan and future plan formulation. In reality, policy development occurs in multiple stages and extends over time. New policies emerge in response to problems and needs. Possible approaches are advanced and debated. New policies are adopted and implemented, and established policies are critiqued and refined. Evidence can add value at every stage, but the question decision makers need to answer differ from one stage to the next and also from one context to another. More specifically, policymakers need evidence to help them to diagnose problems and underlying causes, to design policy options and assess the likely effects of alternatives, to demonstrate and evaluate the impact of new model problems, to monitor program implementation, measuring cost and performance and their sensitivity to different settings, and to evaluate the long-term impacts and cost effectiveness of the existing programs. No single research tool or methodology can deliver the evidence policymakers need to make informed decisions at all these stages. Instead, policymakers and practitioners need a portfolio of rigorous research tools to effectively advance evidence-based policy. Therefore, a number of approaches may be adopted to evaluate the existing plans so that the future plan may be framed in the light of the weaknesses and the strengths of existing policy. Now we can discuss these approaches. The first approach is that of random controlled trials. Random controlled trials in which people are randomly assigned to participate in a program or serve as controls are often referred to as the gold standards for evidence about whether a program is effective or not. And indeed, this approach is extremely powerful because it compares outcomes for a program's participants to the outcomes comparable people achieve without the program. This approach is less time consuming and also cost effective. The second approach is that of micro-simulation models. Often policymakers want to anticipate the likely effects of policy changes rather than waiting to measure their impacts after the fact. Micro-simulation models can forecast outcomes under a wide range of what-if scenarios. Although the development of credible models is complex and time-consuming, once a model is in place, it can quickly and efficiently analyze a wide range of alternative policies. The third approach is that of administrative data analysis. Public agencies at every level of government collect a tremendous volume of information about benefit recipients, market transactions, and enforcement actions. These data can be systematically linked, monitored over time, and analyzed to produce reliable evidence for policymakers. In many cases, administrative data provide the building blocks for micro-simulation modeling or the outcome measures in a random controlled trial. But rigorous analysis of administrative data can also provide answers to immediate questions about program design and implementation. The fourth approach is of performance measurement. Performance measurement is a familiar method to assess the policy effectiveness. The performance is evaluated on basis of a set of indicators. But for this purpose, the agencies would require a full data set on each of the indicator. Fulfilling this condition of availability of data, the planners can easily evaluate the achievements and the shortfalls in the targets. The fifth approach is of qualitative research. Sometimes fully diagnosing a complex problem, designing an innovative solution, or understanding exactly how a program should be implemented requires in-depth, nuanced information that cannot be obtained from conventional surveys or administrative data sources. Qualitative research uses in-person observation, in-depth interviews, and focus groups to dig deep and explore the behavior of the people and institutions. Qualitative methods can explain and enrich findings from statistical data, highlight key issues that might otherwise be missed, and reveal hypotheses for further testing. So students, let us summarize what we have learned from this module. It almost goes without saying today that the integrated policy making should be a continuous process, which should be covering all the aspects of urban life and should be involving all the stakeholders in the process of plan formulation. The evaluative process is necessary at each stage of planning and it should be evidence-based. Scarce public money should go to the programs that target real problems, operate efficiently, and demonstrably achieve their intended goals. But policy making is a messy, iterative process, and the opportunities for evidence to inform and strengthen decisions are numerous and varied. Instead of relying on a single tool, policymakers and practitioners should draw from a portfolio of tools to effectively advance evidence-based policy. Using the wrong tool may produce misleading information or fail to answer the questions that are most relevant when a decision is being made. Applying the right tool to the policy question at hand can inform public debate, help decision makers allocate scarce resources more effectively, and improve the outcomes for people and communities. That's all with today's lecture. I hope you must have enjoyed it. Thank you.